Welcome to part 4 of our Triumph of Nationalism unit, where we're going to be looking at Italy and Germany primarily and their unification. So if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and quickly read chapter 24.3. We are jumping ahead a full chapter, going right to section 3. There's a lot of cool stuff between those two chapters, from the last one to this one. You're welcome to tag along and read that if you want, for other background and how the world's modernizing and industrializing and developing politically and economically during this time as well. But what we're really concerned about is looking at Italy and Germany. So go ahead and read those chapters and then come back and join us for the review. So we're back for the review to take a look at Italy and Germany and how they came to form nations. There's a lot to this, and I think if you're a history type of person who likes the all the battles and the manipulation and the kind of like the staging of events and whatever that lead from point A to point B, then you're really going to like this chapter, because it does get into the prominent figures and kind of the manipulation at work and the wars happening to achieve really an ultimate end of some of these folks. Okay, so I want to show you that nationalism grows and in strength, and it destroys the balance of power. Metternich and the Congress of Vienna set up a Europe that experienced peace from 1815 to 1854, as we mentioned last chapter or a couple chapters ago. But the force of nationalism was gradually destroying that Europe that was drawn up by the Congress of Vienna. National leaders practiced realpolitik, where idealism was replaced by practicality and reality. Let's take a look and see what we have. So we have France this time, and Germany, all a bunch of different provinces. There's Italy with a bunch of different provinces as well. And our last player that we'll be mainly looking at, which is Austria. Now, each of these little states is different provinces or things like that. And some of them, like as in Austria, will depict different nationalities, actually. And in some, it will depict provinces of actually people who have the potential of unification. They've got a lot of those criteria that they meet in terms of being a common nation. Okay, up in Germany and also in Italy. Now, in these little border regions too, you often have over the centuries a turn and a taking and a returning or whatever of these territories. So it's really tough to say technically where these lines end up being along the borders. But, roughly speaking, we can see that they'll end up where they end up by the end of this chapter. Okay. Now let's talk a bit about nationalism. It's a force that we've already talked a lot about, so we won't talk a little bit about it. But also realpolitik. Let's talk a bit about that, because these were forces that were offsetting that balance of power set up in Europe that the Congress of Vienna tried to write up. Now, realpolitik was yet another human extreme to a human reaction or extreme or an opposition or a protest to this overly emotionalized pattern that kind of went through with Romanticism, as we talked about in the last chapter. Realpolitik was not about idealism. It was about reality. It was about facts. It was about no mercy. Like, it was merciless. It was just ruthless. And it used tough, calculated approaches to political situations. It predicted outcomes and tried to set things up to the advantage of the people who could practice realpolitik well. And it didn't have any place for idealism or negotiation or diplomacy and give and take. It was all about manipulate so that you can take what you wanted out of that situation. So the things that we saw through the great diplomacy in the Congress of Vienna, as some sort of idealistic, let's make Europe peace and never have war again, that was in no way part of realpolitik. In fact, war was a reality, absolute necessity and reality in the worldview of our realpolitik leaders here. Okay, I'm going to warn you, as we go through the next couple slides, there's quite a bit to say about some of these individuals, but they're also very unique looking. In addition to knowing this unit as the triumph of nationalism, it could also be called the age of interesting facial hair. Okay, the age of interesting facial hair. Here we have Count Camilo de Cavour, which we talked about in your chapter, who's got this fantastic neck beard, just scraggly down here. Very interesting facial hair designs. So keep these guys in mind. They're very distinctly memorable by their chin, by their nose and below. You could tell who this guy is. He's got the neck beard. This is Cavour. So let's talk about Cavour and the unification of Italy. So after the Congress of Vienna, Italy was left divided into its various provinces. It was not a power or a European power at the time. In the north, Austria had actually claimed parts of Italy or Italian peoples in Venetia and Lombardy, up in northern Italy, up here. And in the south, Spain ruled the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which was here, the boot part, tip of the boot, and this island of Sicily. And so there were parts of Italy that weren't even ruled by Italian dynasties. And the rest of the provinces were scattered amongst their own sort of kingdoms and whatever. So they were not unified. If there was a powerful Italian state, it was Sardinia. And if we remember, Sardinia was granted Piedmont up here in the mainland Europe as part of its territory through the Congress of Vienna. So Sardinia was an Italian dynasty, and it was the strongest of all the Italian states or provinces or countries, the Italian countries. Now, Cavour was appointed Prime Minister of Sardinia and Piedmont, the Italian state, run by or ruled by Victor Emmanuel II, which I'll show you on the next slide. Count Camilo Cavour was a nationalist. He made uniting Italy his highest priority, and nationalism was already, lucky for him, a very popular idea or sentiment on the mainland Italy anyways. Through the 1840s, there were several attempts to unify through war and rebellion and whatever the various Italian provinces. So it was already something in play, and he was just another player to come and actually make it more of a reality. In time, these guys came to look to Sardinia for leadership, as I mentioned, because they were the most powerful. And they did have a king, Victor Emmanuel II, who was of Italian origin, lineage. Now, Cavour is one of our perfect realpolitik leaders because he calculates his moves, okay, in order to achieve what he wants. So what does he want? He wants Italian unification. He wants all this stuff here red, okay? All this stuff here. He doesn't want it for Sardinia. He wants it for Italy. He's going for the nation of Italy. So he has to be very careful in his negotiations and alliances that he makes. Sardinia is not a European power, and if they provoked war with any other of the European powers, they would have been very quickly kind of squashed by them, just by the sheer size and power of the other states or the other countries in Europe. So he had to be very careful. And he couldn't just resort to dreamy, romantic, idealistic rebellions as a way to get what he wanted. He got what he wanted through alliances, through secret dealings, through manipulating and through taking advantage of other people's weaknesses, and of course through war. So what he does first of all is he gains an alliance with France, which is the tip of this territory right here, to help drive out Austria from the north, to provoke some war here in the north to drive out Austria. Okay, he knows he's too small, no matter how dreamy and nationalistic you are, to take on the great Austrian Empire. There's no way. So he needs France's help. So that's what he gains. He gains France's help. Now, he also earns the trust of France and Britain by joining in the Crimean War against Russia in the Ottoman Empire a little bit. So he does he uses that incident to help that to kind of gain a friendship or an alliance a little bit. So he's setting his plays up in order to take this territory from Austria, hopefully. And what he does is that he negotiates with France's Napoleon III. Yes, Napoleon III. He was then Napoleon's nephew, although quite a bit less tactful and not as awesome, even though he wanted to make France as awesome. He was as idealistic as his uncle. Um, he was actually appointed by his people, but then later declared himself as emperor. So does that sound familiar? And this is in the 1850s. Okay, so like less than 50 years later, and you have another Napoleon on the throne claiming to be emperor. So France is just in turmoil ever since the French Revolution, all the way to World War One, which is like over 100 years. Anyways, Cavour agrees, if France were to help them in this war against Austria, to give France these little sections here of Nice and Savoy, which were borderland territories of Piedmont up here. And they would go to France, and that would be kind of like a little trade-off. And then the fact is that France agreed. So with France's help, he's able to provoke war with Austria. And that French Sardinian army defeats the Austrians. Of course, the nationalists in northern Italy are also helping to stage revolts. These are Italians up here being ruled by Austria. They don't want to be, so they can revolt and stage revolts and whatnot against, be disruptive against Austria. And what ends up happening is that all but the Venetia, which is this territory here, and some of these papal states are actually gained in time by the Count Camillo Cavour. There's another guy in the works trying to unify this territory down here, and he works his way up. He was known as Giuseppe Garibaldi. He was a nationalist leader known as the Red Shirt, or leading the red shirts, because he wore red shirt into battle. And he did use nationalist sentiment and his military power to march north with the army and gain all of this territory. And then somehow was convinced to turn it over to Cavour and Sardinia and give it to Victor Emmanuel II. Even though Garibaldi's native homeland of Nice was actually going to be given to France. So a little bit of a pickle there, but they've worked it out. And in any case, by the end of Cavour's rule, you actually have the territories in this light blue color as unified Italy under, yes, here's another guy with awesome facial hair, Victor Emmanuel II, who ruled to 1878. Now, Cavour would die, I think, in 1870, so you would not see some of this stuff, if I remember correctly. Let me just go back. Does it say? Let me just get this out of here. Okay, sorry, 1861, pardon me. So he wouldn't quite see the full unification of his beloved Italy, but it would happen relatively quickly after that. So then what we see here is that finally in 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was declared the king of the new unified Italy, and the new nation. At the time, it was headed by a constitutional monarchy, an elected parliament, and eventually its capital would be set up in the great Rome. So now you have kind of this established unified country of Italy with its capital Rome, something we're very familiar with in Europe today. Venetia, which is up here, would eventually be joined in 1866. So it'd take a little bit more time to acquire this territory from Austria in the north. And then the papal states here would, through a negotiating factor, would be included in Italy or surrendered to Italy in 1870. Both through opportunities provided by German unification, which we'll take a look at in a minute. As we had mentioned, Cavour had already died, and then also the papal states turned over to Italy also kind of gave room for an agreement to leave the Vatican, or the Pope. Papal is Pope, so the Pope's territories were given over to Italy, but the Vatican City in Rome was allowed to be an independent kind of state in the city of Rome itself, which it exists to this day, as well as some offshoot territories around Italy. So the Vatican is its own state, national state, political state in the world, even though it's kind of this tiny little section where the Pope essentially lives in Rome, Italy. So Victor Emmanuel becomes the first king of a unified Italy. And this is part of the glories of Italian unification once they finally achieve it in about the 1870s or so. Okay, so that's Italian unification. Now, it wasn't just all hunky dory after that, and suddenly Italians are just this global superpower. It actually, as we mentioned, takes a lot more time, about 10 more years or so, until Venetia and the Papal States were unified to that country. Even though they were all unified under a king, rivalries still flared between provinces. They had been divided for centuries. It's not like you can just take that together and it's all fun and games. So there's still kinks to work out. You have tensions, for instance, between the industrialized North and agricultural South. They're very different ways of life. So there's a clash between culture, and you could even ask, well, are they nations? Do they even share the same culture, the same way of life? To what extent? I mean, a lot of that had been lost over the time that they'd been divided. Here's another one. I mean, they didn't all have the same language. They had language dialects between regions that made it very different to speak Italian deep south and Italian way up north, and to be able to understand each other. Yeah, the root was Italian, but it wasn't really a unified, consistent language. Another problem was that there were no really strong leaders to come after Cavour. So the country does struggle after this. There was nobody to fall into that place. It was just kind of chaos and a little bit of mumble jumble for them. Parliament, as I kind of just alluded to, was disorganized itself. There was no good leadership there. They had economic problems. I mean, in the north, they were trying to industrialize at a time where everywhere else was industrializing better. So Britain, Germany, etc. In the south, it was agricultural, and there were difficulties down there. So economic problems where the people would revolt or riot because of working conditions, or revolt because of peasant hardship in the agricultural industry. And then the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones, was emigration. The fact that Italians were moving away from Italy faster than ever before. Millions moved to the Americas, a lot to the United States, some to Canada, a lot to South America, actually. You have full cities that have a very, very, very high Italian population throughout the United States. Okay, it's crazy how many Italians moved to the United States during this time, millions. And so when you have that happening, then there's kind of like this draining effect on that motherland, that Italy, that people had fought and dreamed so hard to unify. Finally did, but it was still very much a challenge for them to kind of work out the unification after they were united. So a very weak country, yet they are a unified country. And suddenly we see Italy on the map. There you go. So that's the unification of Italy. So let's take a look at the unification of Germany. Here you have, this guy's maybe a little bit more normal, just big bushy mustache. Beauty. This is Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck, you might know as a donut. He's also a famous military and prime minister leader of Germany at the time of unification of Germany. Okay, the German states, the German provinces in northern Europe. So Bismarck was a nobility. Those guys in Germany were called Junkers. They were nobles. So in Germany, the king had absolute power, or in Prussia, I should say, the king had absolute power, and his nobles, his aristocracy, had the next set of power, and everybody else kind of didn't have power. So they're very much kind of a traditional or a conservative place in the sense of the word of the time because of this. Now, the prime minister does rise to power, Otto von Bismarck, and influence over the king of Prussia. And we're talking about Prussia, which is largely these orange territories here. Okay. The states that were allotted to as Prussia after the Congress of Vienna. So the king of Prussia was William I of Prussia. William I of Prussia. And it was Bismarck's goal as his prime minister to make Prussia the head of a unified Germany, and to unify those separate, divided, smallish German states that had kind of spread across that traditional German territory over time, over the centuries, So whereas you have a unified France for many, many centuries, you don't have a unified Germany in the same way. And so there might be a lot of people in this part of Europe that speak German, have German culture and German heritage, but they're actually parts of different German kingdoms, small kingdoms, okay? Until you have some like Prussia that are gaining more and more power and unity. Now, Prussia then becomes at a point in history at this point where they have enough power that they can initiate a greater unification of this territory to Germany. So that's kind of what Bismarck sets out to do. Now, Bismarck's a realpolitik leader. He, again, is tactful and manipulative and provoking war. He actually said that the question of his day was not to be solved by negotiation or diplomacy, but by, I hope this works, yeah, by blood and iron. Blood and iron. In other words, by war, by armies, by force. Okay, this is the ruthlessness of realpolitik. It set aside idealism to say that we should live in a world of idealism. He wanted, through whatever cost, to unify Germany against his biggest enemy, which would have, or the biggest enemy who maybe had the same ambition, which would have been the Austrian Empire. But keep in mind, the part of Austria, now I'm not too positive about this, but the part of Austria that would have been German was this part here. Okay. The rest of it wasn't German at all. They were, I don't know, Hungarian and other peoples. Okay. Yet Austria had looked to try to swallow up some of these other German states too. So the biggest competition comes between Austria and Prussia here, as we'll see. So Austria itself is at a point where it's less able to do what Prussia ends up doing because Prussia is more industrialized. Austria is more weakened by nationalism within its borders that are actually threatening to divide it. I mean, just look at northern Italy. Italy wants its territories back from Austria, right? So there's nationalism revolts going on in Austria and whatnot. Okay, so these are sort of the moves that Bismarck begins with. The first move that he does is he tries to inspire German unity by recapturing, going to war with Denmark and really, really quickly taking Schleswig and Holstein from the Danes, from the Denmarkians. Why does he want to do this? Because by doing this, these had been German territories long lost by German nations to Denmark. By capturing those from Denmark easily, because it's Prussia, he's able to inspire this German nationalism up in northern Germany, where they're like, "Wow, we got these territories back. Yeah, we're Germans. Go Germans!" Right? And so then there's this sense of increased German pride in northern Germany. Following the lead of Prussia, who's in a position to actually make it happen, as we mentioned. So that was 1864. And then in 1866, he provokes war against Austria. Okay, starting the 7 Weeks' War in Austria. So Austria lost to the more advanced Prussians because, and Italy even won Venetia in this same conflict, the 7 Weeks' War. And Austria was just not quickly able to deploy where Prussia was. They had railways and the best army in Europe. So by inciting this conflict, they are very easily able to conquer the Austrians quickly. And in winning, Austria is actually ousted from the German Confederation, which is really why Austria is Austria today and not part of Germany. Austria is generally a German-speaking territory. They should be part of unified Germany, but they have remained a separate German state as Austria because of the fact that they were outed by Prussia at this point in time. Okay. The German states here then were kind of torn. Some of them promoted or supported Prussia. Some of them supported Austria. But by defeating Austria, what Prussia is able to do, what Bismarck's able to do, is to make them all support Prussia. Okay, to all be united under Prussia. Okay, And essentially, this territory grows then like this. So we have German nationalism inspired up by this little battle against the Danes. We have this middle part unified because Austria's kicked out of the picture. And the last part we need is this southern part. Now, the southern part is Catholic, the northern part primarily Protestant. And so there's a difference of religion or cultural belief here. However, language, history, nationhood is all the same. So to get over that religious divide, he knows what he has to do. Bismarck knows what he has to do is sorry, I circled this because we'll come back to this. So don't forget Alsace and Lorraine, these two yellow territories on the bottom. What Germany has to do, what Prussia has to do, is go to war with France. If you could provoke war with France, okay, all along that southern border, and if there's a threat of French invasion into Prussia or into Germany, then those German states are going to feel at risk or under threat. And the only way they could feel protected is if Prussia came to their aid, thus creating kind of this unifying factor in fighting a common enemy, which would have been France. So Bismarck knows he has to provoke war with France. So in 1870, he does. In a plan to win the support of the remaining southern German states, Bismarck provokes a war with France. He gives them a misleading account of a diplomatic meeting between a French ambassador and King William I. There's William I of Prussia, by the way, the King of Prussia. He's got these awesome fluffy chops and this nice manicured. Do you call a mustache manicured? Very nice. And Napoleon III, which we've talked about already, this funky goatee and these little twisted, twizzly mustache. Okay, Napoleon III. That's a ridiculous mustache. Okay. Between the French ambassador and William I, and he gives this misleading report. The report was printed in German newspapers and went across the continent. France is in an uproar, Germans are in an uproar, and they kind of clash against one another over their different countries' perceptions of this meeting, which actually didn't happen the way it was portrayed to. What is this called? This is called propaganda. So here you have a realpolitik leader using propaganda, even resorting to propaganda to get what he wants. So France ends up declaring war, and that's exactly what Prussia wanted them to do. So France goes, okay, well, we're going to fight you. And Prussia's like, good, that's what we wanted them to say. And as soon as France declares war, Prussia is ready to attack, go in, and they're actually invading France before French soldiers are even deployed. Okay, why can Prussia do this again? Because they've got industrialized railways to transport troops really quick, and because they incited this conflict and wanted it to happen anyways. So here you are. What ends up happening after this is that France is utterly defeated very quickly. Napoleon III himself is taken prisoner and actually removed from power in France and exiled to Britain. Upon winning the war, nationalism then had unified all of Germany and even the southern Catholic ones. And they all accepted Prussian leadership and the kingship of William I, who becomes William I, as we'll talk about, Kaiser of the new German Empire, which had become known as the Second Reich. If you recall, a Second Reich, there was a First Reich, and that would have been the Holy Roman Empire back in the day. And then, of course, there's a Third Reich, and that would have been Hitler's empire they tried to set up in World War II. But the Second Reich was William I, the first unified Germany. Bismarck was his prime minister. Now, Germany after this was super strong, super unified, super industrialized, and soon overtook even Britain in manufacturing and in industry. One of the concessions France had to make was for losing the Franco-Prussian War that Prussia set them up to enter, was paying them a bunch of money and also giving up the territories of Alsace and Lorraine, which I had highlighted on the slide prior. These were strategic industrial points because they were rich in coal and iron deposits. Which, as we know from our Industrial Revolution unit, are two resources that are key to heavy industry. Okay, they are very strategic to improving or boosting or having a head start in industrialization, coal and iron. Okay. Now, what about France? Well, France in the after the Franco-Prussian War, exiles Napoleon III. They set up the Third Republic. They have kind of another little French Revolution, a lot of executions, and they have, what does it say? A new government every 10 months on average for the next, what year are we? For the next 20, 30, 45 years, okay, until World War One. There you go. Now, at this point, because of the Franco-Prussian War, France is also withdrawing its troops that were protecting the Papal States in Italy, and in doing so, make the Papal States at a point where they have to submit and unite Italy. So, a little background on how the Franco-Prussian War helps to unify Italy as well. Okay. There you go. If you love history because of the war and conflict and interactions, and really, I hope you enjoyed those two chapters, or those two parts of this chapter, those two historical stories of the unification of Germany and Italy. Now, the power in 1815, balance of power had been shared amongst five. It tried to be set up in Europe so that there would not be kind of an imbalance of any country more powerful than another, and that type of thing. So the powers who deliberated at the Congress of Vienna were five. They had achieved 40 years of peace, but the very balance they tried to create was undermined by nationalism, which was brewing, whatever that word says, strongly, pardon me. Okay? Which we know. Now, by the 1800s, by the late 1800s, by 1870 and beyond, there were now six great powers. Great Britain, France, Austria, Russia, Italy, and Prussia as united Germany. Now, Prussia doesn't exist anymore. In 1815, the great powers were generally equal in strength, but 60 years later, this wasn't so. Our great powers, or the balance of power, is completely out of whack, where you have Britain and Germany at the top. France, because of its size, is still hanging out in the middle. And then you've got this ultimate weakening of Russia and Austria, and Italy is weak, even though it's new on the scene. It's weak. They do not compare. They're not comparable or balanced in the power that they share. There's huge power advantage in these ones up here versus these ones down here. Now, keep in mind, there is no coincidence that Britain, what do these two have in common, Britain and Germany? That these don't. These two countries are highly industrialized. Okay, they have a head up in the Industrial Revolution effects, in manufacture and industry and economy and that type of thing. So they therefore are the strongest. They have the strongest military, navy, army, okay, transportation network, manufacturing, okay, whereas these do not. In fact, Austria is very much traditional. Russia is very, very old-fashioned, and not really getting with the industrialized times, and therefore very, very weak. Okay. So that's how the balance of power breaks down here by the end of this chapter. Now, we are going to go ahead and take a look at one more chapter from a different textbook that looks a little bit more closely at what we read. We already read a little bit about Austria and how Austria is dealing with its nationalistic divisional situation by creating a dual monarchy. So a little bit more on that with the next section. But until then, now it's time for your review. So you go ahead and review these, come back, and we will take a look at the answers. So welcome to our section review for 24.3. Let's get into these questions. So we're going to do some different definitions, identifies, and some answers. So we want to define realpolitik. Realpolitik means politics of reality. Politics in which idealism had no part, in which you accomplish what you set out to do ruthlessly. Kaiser. Kaiser was the German word for emperor. And we find that Kaiser William I becomes Kaiser or emperor of the Second Reich. Cavour. We're identifying Cavour. Cavour was the neckbeard guy. Okay, he was an Italian nationalist. He united northern Italy and began that process of Italian unification, which was so important to his heart. He was the prime minister of Sardinia under Victor Emmanuel II. Speaking of Victor Emmanuel II, he was kind of that tri-poke guy who had like the pyramid tri-poke. I don't know what you call that style. I don't know if it looked good on me. But he was the king of Sardinia, the first king of unified Italy after Italy was unified. Bismarck, of course, was the Cavour of Germany, the Cavour of Prussia, the Prussian prime minister who united Germany through realpolitik policies. And then we have, what is the Second Reich? The Second Reich was the newly formed German Empire under William I. The Third Republic, we didn't talk about this, so pardon me for this one being on here. The Third Republic was the republic set up after the overthrow of the failures of Napoleon III. Now, if you didn't catch this, Napoleon III is taken advantage of by both Cavour and Bismarck. So he had no realpolitik tact. Okay, he was not good. If he saw it coming, he didn't play his cards right. He's like the kid who thinks he knows how to play chess but doesn't. Okay, I don't even know if you guys know what chess is, but realpolitik reminds me a lot of chess. You're always calculating your next move and trying to one-up your opponent and even force them into situations that give you the advantage. Now, why did Cavour make an agreement with Napoleon III? Well, if you remember, Sardinia needed help to drive Austria out of northern Italy. It couldn't do it itself. Austria was much too big of a state or too big of a country to even think about going to war with if you're tiny little Sardinia. If you have France on your side or France to help you, that's a different story. France is one of Europe's big powers, and it can take on the Austrian Empire, especially if it's unified with Sardinia. And what were the terms? Well, the terms were if France helps, if France helps Italy gain Lombardy and Venetia, Cavour would give France Nice and Savoy, which are those two border territories in the northern part of Piedmont, the territory in mainland Europe that Sardinia had. And that's what ends up happening. Okay, 1860, Sardinia annexed most of northern Italy and got back Lombardy from Austria, and it does follow through with giving France Nice and Savoy. I actually don't know where Nice and Savoy are to this day. That would be an interesting question. Now, how is the Kingdom of Italy established? Well, an Italian parliament declared Victor Emmanuel II king. And that's interesting that they would declare the Sardinian king the king of all of Italy, but he was a legitimate Italian lineage king. And so they take him and accept him as king of the whole Italy, or at least what was unified Italy at that point. However, what problems did Italy face? Well, they faced tensions between the north and the south, lack of strong leadership, lack of well-organized parties within parliament, things like economic crisis in the north and the south, and of course emigration, which we talked about as well. So there's a whole list of problems that they face, lack of leadership and whatnot after Cavour dies, etc. Okay, it's not a happily lived happily ever after story for Italy. They've got a lot to work through, although I feel like their situation's a lot better than France's was. Different story for Prussia. They become successful right away. But why did Prussia rather than Austria take the lead in uniting Germany? The answer to that is Prussia had mainly a German population. It was not like Austria, which was made of many, many nationalities, and a lot of them starting to show discontent with being Austrian or part under Austria's empire. Prussia was largely German. They did have a stronger nationalist sentiment. Plus, they established this free trade area with the other German states that kind of left Austria out. They're very, very ambitious and at a higher point in their industrialization. They had a very powerful army, the most powerful army in all of Europe at the time, like soldiers, like ground soldiers, and Bismarck, of course, they had the wonderful Bismarck. And briefly describe major steps Bismarck took to unify Germany. Okay, step number one, go to war against Denmark, win back Schleswig and Holstein, build German pride. Second, okay, and then what? Provoke France into declaring war on Prussia to gain a few southern states outside Germany, the southern states, the Catholic ones. And then thirdly, I don't know why I don't have that one in there. Second, okay, no. Then thirdly, provoke war against Austria. I think of the 7 Weeks War, we said, completely defeat Austria, oust them from the German Confederation, and build your own a sense of German nationality amongst the other German states. And eventually declare yourself as kind of the king, Kaiser of this new unified German kingdom, which would have been, I think, pretty awesome moment if you were German at the time. By the way, this is interesting. By the way, so my family comes from Germany. I think they would have still been in Germany at the time of German unification. Perhaps they were persecuted a little bit because they did end up emigrating to Russia and then coming to Canada in about 1890 or so. So that's where the Fallmans came from. But they actually came from the southern peasantry, southern German peasantry. And if I go back, I'll sneak a peek back at that map, because there's a German state of my dad's mother's maiden name. Because I don't know if I told you this, but I have German princess blood in me. I'm about, what would it be now? 25% German princess blood in me. Pretty good. From my grandma, from my dad's mom. How had the balance of power in Europe changed since 1815? Well, in 1815, there had been 5 great powers. Prussia was there, but Italy was not. And then you had Britain, Russia, Austria, France, and did I get them all? Okay, I think I did. But in 1871, Britain and Germany were the strongest. The rest were very weak because they were not as industrialized as Britain and Germany. And Prussia didn't exist anymore because Prussia was now Germany. And of course, Italy was now on the scene, and Italy existed now. In what ways were the unification of Italy and Germany alike? This is a great question because there's some parallels here, although the result was not exactly the same. So how were they like? In both countries, they had a strong leader who resorted to using nationalistic sentiment, provoking war when it suited his political goals, and sought nationalism. Okay, they set up. They were prime ministers of their own kings. They were realpolitik leaders, and they set up their own kings in time as kings of the united territories that they won. Okay, lots of other similarities you could see between them. They used France. They manipulated Napoleon III. They both went to war against Austria. Okay. And how was the outcome different between the two countries? Well, Germany, at the outcome of this, was politically and economically and industrializationally stronger than Italy, and was strong right away, became a world superpower, so much so that it becomes a key power player in future world wars, whereas Italy kind of was always a lag behind. Okay, and there you have it. Okay, I think that Italy, maybe if Cavour had lived a little longer to see his plan through, Italy would have had more success. But Cavour dies in the midst of Italian unification, whereas Bismarck carries on living and carries on his influence as prime minister. Okay, that's about it. That wraps this up. Let me go take you up to a quick look at a map to show you how I have German princess blood. So the bonus feature here is that you can see this little state here. It's actually called the state of Hesse, okay, or Hesse. And my grandmother's maiden name was Hesse. And you could find Hesses in Saskatchewan even to this day. But they had moved over to their royal line had moved over, or parts of their family had moved over to Canada and lived on the prairies and tried to live as nobility. I hear there was a mansion. I've heard cool stories about this, but here there was like this mansion, and they had like a hired gardener and a fountain and all sorts of things. And left Germany. Obviously, at the point that they had left, they were no longer a royal family. They were no longer in the royalty. They were, a very wealthy aristocratic family, I would imagine, who at one point had their own territory and their own state. But as Germany unifies, I sometimes wonder what happened to the House of Hesse, which is what I always grew up having it called. So a royal line, House of Hesse. Okay, Mr. Fallman, who do you know? German princess blood. Cool.